Hello, year 11. Welcome to today's lesson. We're going to begin with a quick recap. Today's focus will be on how did Hitler establish a dictatorship. That means, how did he get into a position where he ruled Germany with total power, with no opposition? But just to remind you, when Hitler became Chancellor in January 1933, there were lots of limits on his power. He was not only Chancellor, he was only Chancellor, not President of the Weimar Republic. His powers were limited. There were only 3 Nazis out of 12 in the cabinet. The rest of the senior politicians were from other parties. Hitler owed his job to Hindenburg. He could sack him, so Hindenburg was the president, technically above Hitler. And Hindenburg was suspicious of Hitler, as were members of the German elite. They didn't like him, they despised him, many of them. And Germany was a democracy. He could only make laws if the Reichstag approved. So the Nazis could come up with ideas, but they would have to go to a vote in the Reichstag, and he would need majority support. And he lacked a majority. The Nazis were the single largest party. They had 196 seats, but that was only 33% of the vote, so they were in a minority. And Hitler knew that the Nazi movement was declining. The Nazis gained 37% or 230 seats in the July 1932 elections, so they were on a downward trend. So we're going to look today at exactly how Hitler transforms Germany and makes it into a dictatorship, and it's quite a complex story. So if you just pause the video here and just put today's date, put classwork and put the title, How Did Hitler Establish a Dictatorship? Okay, you can access these documents either from your booklet, you'll find them in there, or they're attached as individual Word documents to this presentation. So we're looking at document A, first of all, and we're going to talk about something called the Enabling Act, or Hitler's blank check. So, remember, Hitler's plan is to transform a democracy into a dictatorship and do it from within. That's always been his plan since 1924. And the failed Munich Putsch. So let's have a look what his plan is. Hitler wanted to destroy democracy and become a dictator. He wanted to rule Germany as a totalitarian state where the Nazis controlled everything. To do this, he needed to change the constitution. And to change the constitution, he needed to have a 2/3 majority in the Reichstag, so a super majority. So that's going to be difficult to do, but Hitler came up with a plan. Number 1. He's going to hold an election at the first opportunity, and this is scheduled for March of 1933. He's going to do everything possible to campaign to gain a 2/3 Nazi majority. And with the 2/3 majority, he's going to pass an enabling act to give himself dictatorial powers. He's then going to use the enabling act to get rid of any other political parties and institutions. And he's going to become both Chancellor and President. That is, Führer or leader on the death of Hindenburg, who at this stage in 1933 is a very old man. So if you look at the right side of the presentation, what Hitler's wanting in the Enabling Act is essentially a blank check. That means he wants to pass a law that gives him unlimited freedom of action. That's what the term means. So when Hitler gets this 2/3 majority, he's going to pass a law that essentially suspends democracy in Germany. The only snag being, he needs 2/3 of all politicians in Germany to agree to this. So putting the plan into action. So an election was planned for March the 5th, 1933. Goering and Frick, senior Nazis, were given control of the police so they could persecute opposition to the Nazis if it became necessary during the election campaign. And Hitler made an appeal to the German people, telling them that if they voted for the Nazis, then he would make Germany into a proud, great nation again. And laws were passed limiting the amount of campaigning the other political parties could carry out. And you see here an election poster from 1933. Hitler is shown with President Hindenburg. Hindenburg was a World War I hero, as well as President of Germany. So posters like this were used to persuade the voters that Hitler had the backing of the president and they should vote for him in the March the 5th election. So we'll move on to the next slide, and there's a little activity I need you to do. Okay, 11, we come to the first of our tasks now. So I just need you to make a copy of the first yellow box. So I need you to write a heading that says, or start a sentence that says, Hitler planned a legal revolution that would make the Nazis the only political party in Germany and leave Hitler as dictator. And then what I want you to do is reread page 1, what we just looked at, and under this heading, just bullet point what Hitler's plan was going to be and how he put his plan in action. So if you can pause the video, just do that for me now. Okay, so let's continue our story of how Hitler becomes dictator. Remember, he's planned an election for March 1933. He needs a two-thirds majority. Hitler actually has a stroke of luck. There is a fire, the Reichstag fire. It happens on February the 27th. The German parliament burns to the ground. And conveniently, a communist called Marius van der Lubbe was suspected of starting the fire. And actually, a lot of historians have felt that this is too convenient. And many historians suspect the Nazis themselves started the fire because they hoped the Reichstag fire would benefit them in the coming March election. And it really did. So let's look at what were the immediate results of the Reichstag fire. So the Nazis obviously blamed the communists. And with his powers over the Prussian police, the senior Nazi Goering had 4,000 communists rounded up and thrown into prison. Remember, the Communist Party is a strong party in Germany. It was predicted to do well in the March elections of 1933. So persecuting them during this campaign was actually a good political move for the Nazis. And Hitler was able to convince Hindenburg that there was a terrorist threat to Germany. So using Article 48, Hindenburg passed a law called the Law for the Protection of People and State. Remember, he doesn't have to get this through the Reichstag. So it gave the police, remember, controlled by the Nazis, the power to search houses, confiscate property and detain people without trial. So the Nazis obviously used the law to persecute the communists, their political opponents, and the SPD, the socialists, again, their political opponents in this coming election in March, in order to limit their chances in this election. And Hitler also tried to convince people to vote Nazi by telling them that the Nazis were the only ones who seemed able to control the communists. So Hitler tried to widen his appeal and say to the German people in March 1933, we're under terrorist attack from the communists, they burnt down our Reichstag. The only way you can secure Germany's future is lend your vote to the Nazis. Give me your vote and we will sort out this terrorist threat. And Goering actually appoints 50,000 new policemen to help keep order. But most of them were members of the SA. And their idea of keeping order was just attacking Hitler's political opponents during the election campaign leading up to March 1933. So hopefully you've understood that. And we're going to move on to the next slide and look at the results of the election of 1933. So, the March 1933 election, even after all his campaigning, even after all the advantages the Reichstag fire gives to Hitler, there's still a problem. The Nazis achieved their best ever electoral results, getting 288 seats after 647. And the DMVP supported the Nazis, another far-right party. With their 52 seats, the Nazis did have a slim majority. But to achieve a two-thirds majority in the Reichstag, needed to pass the Enabling Act, the Nazis needed 432 seats. So if you look at my graph here, you can see the Nazis in the purple colour, you can see the DMVP in the light blue colour. You can see if you add those two together, you're just over the 50% mark, a long way from the two-thirds he's going to need. So Hitler has a big problem now. How's he going to get enough support to get an Enabling Act through the Reichstag? The March 1933 election has not delivered the Nazis the two-thirds of seats that they need. Okay, on to the next slide. Okay, I just need you now to do a little bit of note-taking. So again, just put the subheading, Hitler benefited greatly from the Reichstag fire, which enabled Hitler to crack down on his major opposition, the socialists and communists. And again, what I need you to do is obviously explain the results of the Reichstag fire and explain the results of the election of March 1933. So again, that information on page 2 just. So Hitler's next moves, he goes to a plan B and he alters his plan. So I'm going to get the communists banned. This would make the 2/3 majority easier to achieve. He's going to get the DMVP, the DVP, and one other party to vote with the Nazis to create their 2/3 majority. And he's going to intimidate the SPD so they wouldn't turn up, then announce that any absentees would be counted as a yes vote. So that's his new plan. So he's going to manipulate the situation to get himself the 2/3 majority he needs. So did the plan work? Well, yes, it did. So the communists were banned from sitting in the Reichstag because of the Reichstag fire. They were considered terrorists within Germany, and even though they won elected seats in the election, they weren't allowed to take them. The DMVP and the DVP, which were right-wing parties in Germany, they supported the Nazis anyway. And many of the SPD were either in prison, arrested during the clampdown after the Reichstag fire, in exile, or simply decided not to turn up. And some of them had been killed. SA and SS men threatened those who were brave enough to try to attend the Reichstag to vote against the Enabling Act. So Hitler made the Centre Party the focus of his speech to get the Enabling Act through the Reichstag. He promised them that the Catholic Church, the Centre Party is the party of the Catholic Church, would not be harmed and that Catholic schools would be kept. And he made a big deal out of the fact that both the Catholics and the Nazis hated the communists. He also said that they were both interested in traditional values, the family life, hard work, etc. So the Centre Party voted with the Nazis, and their 74 votes gave Hitler the 2/3 majority he needed. If you look at my two bar charts of March 1933, remember the election itself doesn't give Hitler the majority he needs. But if he can get the DMVP, the blue party, to support him, if he can get the DVP party to support him, if he can get the Centre Party, the Green Party, to support him, and then he gets the communists banned, the KPD, and if he can get fewer SPD politicians turning up, he's going to really get to that 2/3 majority, and he does. So, what was the Enabling Act, and what did it do? So, Hitler passed an act that said, Article 1, the Reich Cabinet is authorised to enact laws. So you don't need to go to the Reichstag anymore. It is just the Führer and the Cabinet. The laws enacted by the Reich Cabinet may deviate from the Constitution, so he can pass laws that break the Weimar Constitution. The laws enacted by the Reich Cabinet shall be prepared by the Chancellor. So Hitler's given himself the power to create laws on his own. And the law comes into effect on the day of its publication. It ceases to be valid on the 1st of April 1937. So Hitler argues that just give me 4 years of these powers to solve Germany's problems. So in other words, the government led by Hitler could make laws that would take effect immediately without them having to be passed by the Reichstag. In other words, Hitler had been given the powers of a dictator. That's his blank check. That gives him absolute authority now over Germany. And he's got that through the Reichstag because he's told the parties that it's a desperate time, it's an emergency time, it's a Great Depression, there's terrorist threats. Give me these powers just for 4 years and I'll transform Germany. And then obviously democracy can resume. That was a lie, but the elected parties in Germany vote to give Hitler the powers of a dictator. It is all legal. He's not taken power. He's not stolen power. He has assumed power legally. So what did Hitler do next? He used the powers he had been given under the enabling law to get rid of any alternative groups or places of power. So on the 31st of March 1933, The state parliaments were closed down. They were then reorganised so that there was a Nazi majority in each one. Nazi state governors were appointed to make sure that the state parliaments followed Nazi wishes, and in Jan 1934 the state parliaments were abolished altogether and the state governments were told what to do by the Nazi government in Berlin. Hitler knew certain states weren't very pro-Nazi. He didn't want Germany to continue as a federal system where there could be anti-Nazi governments in place. So he got rid of that system. 2nd of May 1933, the trade unions were smashed. The Nazis didn't like them because a lot of their members were supporters of the KPD, the communists, or the SPD, the socialists. Their offices were trashed and the offices and officials were arrested. The Nazis set up a German Labour Front that now claimed to represent the workers. And on the 10th of May 1933, the SPD received the same treatment as the trade unions. The Nazis occupied their offices, destroyed their newspapers and confiscated their funds. And in July 1933, using the Enabling Act and the powers that gave him, all other political parties but the Nazis were banned. So now by the middle of July 1933, Hitler has absolute power and he's used those powers to remove opposition in the states, opposition from trade unions, opposition from other political parties. He's now emerging as a dominant leader. Okay, we'll just go to the next and final slide. Okay, this is the final note-taking activity. So again, the third heading or subheading that says Hitler did deals with other parties and intimidated his opponents in order to pass the Enabling Act. And then you need to use the notes on page 3 to explain how he gets the Enabling Act passed. So what does he do to achieve that? Once you've done that, you need to go to the bottom row. You need to put a subheading. Hitler then used the Enabling Act to get rid of any remaining opposition to the Nazis. And then using the information on page 4, or the 4th page of notes, you need to just explain what we covered in the last slide, how Hitler uses these powers to get rid of the state government, to get rid of the SPD, and indeed to get rid of all other political parties. Once you've done that, that ends today's lesson. Next time we're going to look at something called the Night of the Long Knives and how Hitler, after destroying all his external opponents, starts to purge the Nazi party itself of people who might challenge his power. Hold on.